I'm afraid we'll have to stop the questions there and move on to Emma. I'm not afraid that we have to move on to Emma Bowey. This is very interesting. It's quite a different kind of memorial, still a memorial. And it's one of those memorials that's become sort of slightly contentious since 2020. The type of memorial, at least. But I will let Emma speak about the William Armstrong Monument in Newcastle. And Emma will be, Andrew will be helping Emma with her slides. So.
Well, while that's loading up, I suppose I can just kind of give a brief. Oh, here it is. So, like was just being mentioned, this caused a bit of controversy last year, and about I think it was about June. When they were talking about the list of monuments which they believed that people wanted to be pulled down in response to the Black Lives Matter protests. What makes this interesting is that at the time there was actually quite a lot of outcry about the idea about this monument being pulled down. And I suppose in a sense, what David was talking about, the idea of memory and place, Armstrong has such an important place in the Northeast. You know, just the amount of things that he has been associated with is just tremendous. I mean, being local, you know, I've lived here pretty much my whole life, and when I was researching a lot of this, I just had no idea about most of the things that he was even connected with. So I suppose the idea of this talk is just to kind of go through the brief things relating actually to the monument. So in terms of Armstrong's life, he died in 1900 at the age of 90, and he left quite a legacy behind. I think that's what makes it quite interesting. And there's a quote which somebody had written, which basically said that he always trusted his own judgment in seeking advisors and managers, although not everybody outside the business appreciated his contribution to the development of weapons of warfare, and this sadly cast a shadow over his incredible career. So that's quite an interesting quote, because he had his fingers in so many different things. And for example, so we know that one of his sort of big what would you call it, sort of empire things was actually the Elsick Works. And he was also behind the Swing Bridge, which I didn't know, which was quite a surprise. I didn't know that. And there's also the hydroelectricity at Cragside as well. He actually did some reconstruction of Bamburgh Castle, which he did the work based on what he thought a castle, medieval castle, should look like. And the Armstrong Gun, which I'll mention briefly. And that's linked very much with his armaments program, and amongst many others as well, not just in his life, but also beyond. So the post-Armstrong era, which includes the Vickers Armstrong merger, amongst many others. So next slide. So this just gives you, it's very hard to find really a lot of things about the statue itself. I was kind of hoping there would be more images from actually when they unveiled it, but I really struggled to find anything. So the monument was constructed by William Thornycroft. It was actually interesting. It was actually unveiled in 1906, which was the same year as Newcastle University, which was Durham University, but known as King's College. So when that was officially opened by Edward VII. And the reason why Newcastle, the link with Armstrong and Newcastle, is actually because Armstrong laid the first stone of King's College. So you can see that relationship there. And he had numerous things in terms of philanthropy as well. So he was a benefactor of the Literature and Philosophy Society in Newcastle, as the Lytton Phil, as we locals call it. And interesting was the what we sort of know is the Hancock Museum, which you can kind of see in that image behind. So the reason why that was actually built was the initial collection, which was the Natural History collection, which was actually on Westgate Road, but they found that the actual collection was becoming too big, and the museum where it was just too small. So what Armstrong did is he actually donated £11,500 to have this museum built, which in today's money is actually 761,124. So that's quite an impressive amount of money. But another side of it is the relationship that Armstrong actually had with Newcastle. So he actually gave two parks to the people of Newcastle. So it was like a recreational space for people to go to when they weren't working. So Jesmond Dean and Paddy Freeman as well. Jesmond Dean is quite an interesting place because it's still very much loved by people in Newcastle. And especially with the last year, it was very much a place that people felt, you know, it's sort of a nice open space, and they could enjoy it the way that they could back then. Let's see. So the idea of the actual monument, so you've got Armstrong standing there and that kind of poise with scroll in one hand and a book in the other, in a very sort of business-like image. But what makes this quite interesting is the two reliefs, one on the left, one on the right. So one celebrates his shipbuilding career, and the other one is, try and get this right, so the left illustrates the lowering of the guns onto a ship, and on the right, the swing bridge, both celebrating Armstrong's massive munitions and shipbuilding empire. So slide 3. So the way I look at it is this idea that Armstrong was a magician, so he's known as the magician of the North. So there's 3, I think, quite significant things that he actually did. Firstly, the Armstrong gun. So the Armstrong gun came about because during the Crimean War, a lot of the British men were actually lugging a very, very heavy gun across the battlefield, and Armstrong heard about this and he decided to create the Armstrong gun, which was lightweight. It was also better accuracy and was, let's see, and yeah, so it was, you know, safer to actually use, as safe as it can be on the battlefield. But for the British men fighting, it actually saved quite a lot of lives. And because of this, the War Ministry decided to commission Armstrong to do further ammunitions for subsequent wars. Secondly is the safety valve. So what was happening in a lot of the mines was when the men were working down the mine, is the gas, or the sort of the what was it again? I'm getting myself lost. So the steam that would actually come out in the mines was actually causing severe burns. So what he had done is he decided to create this safety valve, which would ensure that there was a limited amount of danger whilst they're down there. So it's also thinking about, you know, obviously if they get severely burnt, you know, if they can't work, and then you don't have the amount of workers. So it's thinking very much in the business kind of sense, but I think it's interesting to see how he sees that problem but wants to do something about it. And the third thing here is the Whittledean Water Company. Now this is something I've never heard of, which was really fascinating. So what this was basically to supply Newcastle and Gateshead with a steady, clean and regular water supply, which at the time was described as the greatest step with reference to the hydraulic supply of the town that it has taken in the kingdom. So it must have had such a great impact, not just Newcastle, but how water was directed throughout the city. And obviously that things like, you know, clean water, good health, and, you know, sanitation and things like that. So that's an interesting sort of side that you see of him as well. So next slide. So this is just going briefly over the two reliefs. So firstly, there's the Elsick Works, which was basically his baby. And this employed quite a lot of local workers. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was one of the biggest employers on Tyneside, and he did encourage good housing for the workers. But in that, you know, you have that sort of good, reasonable relationship with the master and the worker. But on the other side of it, this did actually lead to a 9-hour strike, because the workers felt that the long hours were just not durable, and they said that Armstrong was a very cold and remote person who was out of touch with the workers. So they did strike for 14 days, which from what I read, Armstrong was quite surprised by this. But there was an agreement which was met later on. In terms of the vessels, so the actual ships that he was building, he produced over 40,000 vessels, which were actually for the South American customers, which is another interesting side of things, not just, you know, within Europe, but beyond as well. And as I mentioned before, with the Crimean War, he did create this gun that did, you know, where he saw those problems, but he wanted to try and come up with a solution to it, and which ended up quite successful. Right, next slide. So this is just going on about the swing bridge and these hydraulic systems. So he did create a very multi-purpose system. So that basically where they're using this system through different things. So this included high pressure engines, a dock and hoist, minor machinery, and even swing bridges. So the swing bridge is probably the most significant one in terms of the hydraulic system. So the bridge was constructed in 1868 to 76, and was built on what they believe was the site of the Roman and medieval bridges. This was through Armstrong and Company of Newcastle and under the supervision of the Time Improvement Commission. And the bridge is operated by activating high pressure water from a hydraulic system accumulator. I'm not an engineer, so just some people do know what that is, but that's how it's been described, how it works. So the bridge was officially opened in 1876 and was a necessary development to allow upriver navigation by seagoing vessels, which did include Armstrong's expanding Elsick works. So you can see he's creating these things very much for his own business. So even though other vessels would be able to use the access through the swing bridge, it was predominantly for him. Right, and I think it's next slide. So this was actually a quote, which I think is a very interesting quote. When we're talking about the Black Lives Matter, and I mean, for those who may not know about this, which I didn't actually know this at the time. So what it is Armstrong was supplying arms to both sides of the Civil War. And this is pretty much his response, which the overall theme is that I'm a businessman, you know, somebody pays me and I do it. And that's it. So in terms of thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement, the Armstrong statue, as I did mention, was one that was on the list. And this, I think it's always an interesting thing to consider in terms of where the sort of the business side and the sort of the what is right side. And I suppose from my point of view, it's one of those things that I think it was quite a surprise, maybe because I didn't know a great amount in terms of where he was involved, but because my own history is tied to shipbuilding. My granddad was actually a shipbuilder at Swan Hunters, and he actually so he was during the Second World War, he was actually a volunteer fireman. And he had said that when the Manus station was bombed by the Nazis during the Second World War, that the plan was to aim for Armstrong, Vickers And this is because it was so worldly famous, because it was this massive ammunition company. So in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, there was an interesting article, I think it might be in the Journal, I think, sorry, and it was the MP for Newcastle, I'll probably get the name wrong, but her name is T. Amra, who had looked at this. So she kind of thought, okay, Black Lives Matter, the Armstrong Monument, where does it stand? So she was looking at everything. So she wasn't just looking at the movement of now, she was thinking about everything that Armstrong had done in his past, and to try and say, okay, should it be taken down or shouldn't it? And one of the things she did say is she did wish that he was a lot more proactive in the abolition. There is a quote which was actually mentioned in the article, which was by Armstrong, who said, "If I thought that war would be fomented or the interests of humanity suffered by what I have done, I would greatly regret it, yet I have no such apprehensions." So it kind of leads that way, but he's still sort of like, I'm still a business, this is still a business. So it's never definite about his own sort of political and civil opinions about the Civil War. So in terms of that article, she actually came to the conclusion that she believed that the statue should stay, even though there are a lot of things negative about Armstrong, but there was a lot of positive too. And see if there's anything else I want to mention. So this idea of the magician of the North, I think you can, for me, I very much say, yes, he was a magician of the North, because he did identify the problems, he sought to solve them, and he did do quite a lot of things. Even in today, his marker on the Northeast is quite interesting, you know, even tourism. So the likes of, you know, Bamburgh Castle and Cragside, I mean, two of the biggest sites in Northumberland. So from the cultural and economic impact on the region, it still carries through. And I just want to actually mention something which is in the last slide. These are two quotes which were recent quotes. Unfortunately, one is Donald Trump, so I apologize for that, but it is an interesting quote. So go on, the last slide should be the last one. Yes. So there's two articles, so I'll leave this up to the audience to decide how they want to look at this. So this is actually the article which was in, unfortunately, it is the Sunday Post. So if you like Sunday Post, great. But anyway, this was talking about so a war made in Scotland. 16 Scottish firms bid to arm Saudi-led coalition. Enterprise chiefs offer 9 million in support. New pressures to end humanitarian disaster. So you actually see this sort of thing happening today. The idea of arms, businesses selling arms to Saudi Arabia is actually an interesting thing when considering that that's so a negative part of his past in terms of the Civil War armaments. And I suppose it's to think about what he had said about why he did it. And this quote by Donald Trump is very interesting. So he is basically saying, Donald Trump is basically saying, if I don't sell it to, so if they don't, you know, have us making these armaments, somebody else will, and it's not going to help us. So we're going to lose that money. And it's an interesting quote, because you can see very much a very similar idea about business and armaments. So I'll just leave that up to the audience to decide on, I suppose, on what your own personal opinions is on that in terms of the armaments. So I'm not going to put my own personal things in there. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma. That was really interesting, and I'm really glad that we had somebody who came forward to talk about that kind of, you know, that class of monument that has been really contentious in the past year. I absolutely see the issues surrounding it. One of the things that I wanted to push was the visual impact of the statue itself and all of the things that you have found out, or you know, one can know about William Armstrong, and whether they're, you know, what the actual statue itself says to, now I say the viewer, I'm just going to idealize a viewer for a minute. You know, how does the statue actually speak in a sense? Because he's holding a book. I see this a lot with Roman statues. This is a very typical public figure, civic hero. I presume that the scrolls are actually maps or plans, I would guess, of drawings. Hold on a second. Snowman! Sorry. So, yes, what do you think, basically, about how the statue and it surrounds itself actually work with that history of William Armstrong? Does it convey that kind of sense of him? Is it ambiguous?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you say with the imagery, because it's very typical of that sort of, you know, 19th century image of you know, the sort of Roman, you know, imagery. So it kind of, in a way, thinking about everything that he's done, it's probably not the best example. It doesn't really tell you a great amount. I mean, I didn't even realize there was these freezers. And I went, what? So, you know, people just go past and not really think of it. And when I think of Armstrong, because it's one of those things that I have a kind of, I suppose, love-hate sort of thing towards him, because yes, he did quite a lot of things in terms of engineering and really pushed the boundaries of technology. But if you kind of think in as a businessman, as an employer, you know, you go to Craigside and you see how he was living in a lot of luxury, and then you go to like Woodhorn Museum and you're seeing how these, you know, these like miners, like people like that, how they're working, you know, and their life is completely different to that, and you kind of almost think there's something not right here, and the way that the whole thing about being an employee with these people, obviously during the time when unions are starting to kind of come through, or even having been a member of a union is a bit tricky, and you think that they had so much power over these people, and we don't kind of see that in that image. They want to kind of glorify what he did, without kind of thinking of that whole picture. And I think if they were going to kind of look at it again, maybe they need to think about how best to think what was it that he actually did. Is it right to have that kind of figure of him? Does it have to be a figure of him? Could it be something else relating to I suppose his whole career? Because that just picks up a few things which I find interesting. It's just like his engineering, which I understand why it's there, but it's very much a thing of the time it was built as well, which I think now it would be completely different. They would look for different things and something more for now, like culturally relevant for now.
I think you're right. They put a spin on it now that's not the kind of, you know, Victorian elite kind of spin. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't know whether Ludmilla is still here. She does portraiture, so she may have something in particular to say, but I think she might have had to go, just as we're a little bit over time, so she might have had something else she had to run to. So what about John Dixon? I see that you've unmuted yourself. Did you have anything to say?
Yeah, it's John's wife, Mavis.
Oh, hello.
Hi. We were on holiday in the Indian city of Jodhpur, and we went to the Moranga Fort, wonderful place. And in there, there's a spiral staircase, wrought iron, made by Armstrong of Newcastle. We had to photograph it because the whole place was gorgeous. It was colourful. It was so busy. And this thing had come all the way from Newcastle, which wasn't colourful, really. So we just had to do it. And he got all around the world, I suspect, at Armstrong and the things he made.
And there was a gun there.
And there was a gun there.
And there was a gun there, an Armstrong gun there.
Yes, that's actually interesting. I didn't actually put it in the talk, but there was, I think it was, is it the Calcutta and I can't remember, I can't remember where the other side, but it was a bridge that was actually built by the Armstrong Company. And this was actually a tourist site, I think, for a while, because I'm assuming it was quite a lovely view, you know, for people to see. So it actually was quite famous for quite a long time. So yeah, very much he was obviously selling you know, commissions from across the globe as well, which I think is interesting, taking it out of its sort of local sort of relevance to kind of further out.
Thank you, Emma.
I need to unmute myself. Richard, yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Emma. That was really interesting talk. I think Armstrong is a very interesting figure in many, many ways. And let's be blunt, he is not the same as Edward Colston in Bristol, in the sense that he, you know, owned slaves and things like that. What we might say is he was more amoral, in the sense, you know, what you said, his business attitude is, you know, it's a bit like Dirty Harry. He's not racist, he hates everybody. You know, he was willing to sell his weapons to whoever. So you have the Sino-Japanese War in the 1890s, where they're both the battle fleets are made on Tyneside by Armstrong. Armstrong's works was the only one where you could design a warship from paper through to it sailing out fully armed, ready to give battle, you know, in the world. But on the other hand, there is, you know, all of this philanthropy that he did, you know, and so I think it's very difficult to disentangle him from what people associate with the kind of image of Tyneside as an engineering place, because he is the giant that created this. You know, it's self-interest. You know, the swing bridge is there because he wanted to get these enormous ships down the river. So he demolished the Georgian stone bridge that was static to enable to get through. He also removed several islands in the middle of the River Tyne to do that. You know, and the water supply from Whittle Dean, it did provide water to people in Newcastle, but it ended up powering his hydraulic cranes right on the edge of the quayside. So he's a really interesting figure, that there's always an element of self-interest, even in the great philanthropy that he does. And I think what is really interesting about him is that he doesn't really get involved in politics. And that's, you know, there he does stand aside from the likes of our dear friend Donald Trump, in the sense that he was aloof, as his work has said, in the sense that, you know, he wasn't trying to run for parliament. If you compare it to people like Balco and Vaughan in Middlesbrough, you know, we had the transport bridge last time, where both of those served as mayors of Middlesbrough in the Victorian period. Armstrong wasn't really interested in that. So in that sense, we're perhaps fortunate that he wasn't the kind of typical Tyneside oligarch of a century before, where in the 18th century, only 2 mayors of Newcastle were not members of the Merchant Venturers Guild, and where you had to be a member of the Trade Guild to become politically important. Armstrong stood aside from that. So I think your great talk, you know, you've really highlighted he is a problematic figure, but I think he's very difficult to disentangle from what we think of as Tyneside, well, even Northeast history, you know. I mean, it's really interesting, you know, that Armstrong College is in Newcastle because Durham University wanted to be a theological college. It wasn't interested in engineering or medicine or law or these practical things. It had to have those colleges in Newcastle, not in Durham. He's a man of his time, and I think that's the problem, that like so many men of that time, they are very problematic to us looking back. But great talk, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was very much, I think that's what it is. I mean, it is like that kind of love-hate sort of feeling you have towards him, but it is very much about his own, you know, wants, and that's very much how he seemed to run. And then obviously, in a way, that's probably why people felt that he was becoming so far away as an employer, that he wasn't really caring really for his workers in the way that he probably should. But yeah,
problematic. I think that's a problematic statement, because what did Victorian factory owners do for their workers? Is he any different to any others? I mean, he paid for schools, he paid for churches, he paid for hospitals, and that he was not going to use himself. They were for his workers. I mean, before Armstrong, that whole north side of the Tyne, Benwell, Warbottle, Throckley, Elsick, these were all distinct villages. If you look at the 1856 Ordnance Survey map, these are all distinct villages in a landscape of fields. After Armstrong, they are subsumed into these massed terraces that, you know, it's wonderful to look at from the other side of the river and see the terraces marching up the hillside purely to work in Armstrong's factories. So, you know, he actually changed the whole landscape of Tyneside for his own ends. But I think we have to think, was he any worse or any better than others? And I think, you know, he probably was as good or as bad as any of the others. You know, union officials didn't go down well in any Victorian mill owner or industrialist book, really. But, you know, again, it's another thing to ponder about the man.
It is, yeah. I mean, when you think about Jesmond Dean, obviously he had his own house there as well. Yeah. Even though it's almost like, right, workers, I'm going to give you this, but I want to build this. Yeah. So it's always looking at all the different things and what is the actual reason behind it. It's always an interesting thing.
It's called added value, Emma.
Yes.
Well, you know, is it any different is it any different from today, where, you know, to get major, you know, you look at something like HS2, where we are told there's all these environmental benefits of having HS2, there's all of these economic benefits, there's all of this community work that will go on with any of these big projects. The fact that they're just bulldozing through ancient forests, you know, through everybody's, you know, countryside, is supposed to be offset by whatever they might do in terms of social housing, a few houses thrown in along the side of the railway kind of thing. We haven't really changed, I think, it's the thing.
The problem with it, David, is they keep pretending it's to benefit the North. They forget that the North doesn't start till you get to Darlington.